Hello. I've decided that in these quarantine times that maybe I'd just record myself reading a story. So this is not for little ones. Think more like original Grimm fairy tales. So this is an excerpt from a book that I just reread again because I want to get the sequel. That's going to be backwards. Anyway, this is what it looks like. So this is the Hazel Wood by Melissa Albert. And I'll read you the synopsis. 17-year-old Alice Proserpine and her mother have spent most of Alice's life on the road, always one step ahead of the uncanny bad luck biting at their heels. But when Alice's grandmother, the reclusive author of a book of pitch-dark fairy tales, dies alone on her estate, the Hazelwood, Alice discovers how bad her luck can really get. Her mother is stolen away by a figure who claims to come from the cruel, supernatural world where her grandmother's stories are set. Alice's only lead is the message her mother left behind: stay away from the Hazelwood. Alice has long steered clear of her grandmother's cultish fans, but now she has no choice but to ally with her classmate and fairy tale superfan Ellery Finch, who may have his own reasons for wanting to help her. To rescue her mother, Alice must venture first to the Hazelwood and then into the world where her grandmother's tales began, and where she might discover why her own story went so wrong. Ooh. Okay, so what I'm going to be reading is at the end of the book, there are two of those fairy tales from the book that's part of this novel here. So so here we go. The book that is referenced in this novel is called Tales from the Hinterland. So these are, well, this one is one of those stories. This is called Jenny and the Night Women. A rich farmer and his wife, heartbroken because they could not bear a child, prayed for the gods to give them one. But there were no gods to hear. And so, because they knew the way of things in their part of the world, they got their child through different means. In spring, the wife swallowed the pink and white bloom of an apple blossom. So eager was she to do it that she didn't notice at the flower's heart the creep of brown. It had half rotted with rain. By summer, the blossom had ripened and unfurled, turning to fruit in her belly. In autumn, the woman felt sick to her soul. She retched and vomited up an apple. It was red and crisp and delicious, its juice sweet as wine, and its skin firm like the skin of a drum. She ate the fruit with ferocious appetite, swallowing the core along with the flesh. At the fruit's heart was a circle of soft brown, just as if a worm had burrowed in. But the wife didn't notice the rot, and she didn't taste it, and she felt nothing but joy as her belly swelled and ripened. In the course of time, she bore a child, a pink and white and beautiful child, with a core of hidden decay. Because they'd waited so long and so longingly, the farmer and his wife spoiled the girl. They named her Jenny, and there was nothing she wanted that she didn't get. Day by day, year by year, she grew prettier and prettier, and worse and worse. By the time Jenny turned 12, even her father could see it. She's a grown girl and a farmer's daughter, he told his wife, not a princess. Beautiful or not, who will marry a farmer's daughter who thinks she's royalty? Reluctantly, Jenny's mother agreed. They would no longer obey her every whim. The next morning, Jenny wanted cake for breakfast. Remembering her promise to her husband, her mother refused. Jenny looked at her a long moment and then ate her bread and jam. That afternoon, Jenny asked for one of the kittens the barn cat had birthed. Her mother told her no, they'd been promised away. Jenny narrowed her eyes and said nothing. That evening, they were hurrying back home through town, where they'd traded eggs for salt, when Jenny spied a glass blower selling his wares. She demanded her mother buy her a glass flower. No, her mother said, you have enough pretty things, and you break most of them. Jenny screamed. She tugged her golden hair and stamped the heel off one of her soft leather boots. But her mother wouldn't budge. You'll have to wear broken shoes, she said grimly. Furious, Jenny slapped her mother across the face. Quick as a thought, her mother slapped her back. Jenny had never in her life been struck. Holding her cheek, crooked in her broken boot, she ran past the edge of town and into the trees. Soon her mother's cries were beyond hearing. At first, Jenny was warmed by the thought of her mother's regret. Then Jenny was angry with her mother for disobeying her and forcing her to run away. Then she grew frightened as the forest's familiar edges gave way to something wild and unknown. The sun was down on both Jenny's boots, long abandoned, when she saw a glimmer of light through the trees. The glimmer became a flickering orange glow. It made Jenny's mouth go dry with desire for food and a fire to warm her hands by. She wasn't afraid of who she might meet there. So certain was she that everyone she met would love her. Her certainty dimmed when she saw the person sitting on a fallen log beside the fire. Staring into its heart, a girl with tangled hair to her waist, wearing a red kerchief and a rough brown dress. Go on your way or sit beside me, but choose one, the girl said, staring into the fire. Her voice was old and deep, like she'd borrowed it from another person. Jenny came forward on her dirty feet, one hand tugging at her hair. She tilted her head sweetly, imagining how the firelight must be playing over the beauty of her face. Please, she said, won't you help me? I'm cold and hungry and lost in the woods. The girl only looked at her. Stupid of you to lose yourself, wasn't it? It's my mother's fault, Jenny snapped, and she told the girl of her mother's crimes, inventing a few besides. By the end of her tale, the girl was shaking her head. Your mother deserves to be taught a lesson. Your father, too, for allowing her to treat you this way. There was an edge to the girl's voice, teasing and unkind. Jenny sensed it and recoiled. She was rotten in her middle, that was true, but she wasn't yet rotted through. There was a part of her that listened to the girl's words and heard what was beneath them. A dark mischief that promised a hard ending. But the girl by the fire was clever. She saw Jenny pull away and she changed tack. Someone as pretty as you, she said, should be treated like a princess. Beautiful, Jenny corrected her, and queen. Someone as beautiful as me should be treated like a queen. Yes, you should play a trick on your parents. You should teach them a lesson. That they mustn't underestimate you or learn to say no. Once they start, they'll never stop. That was a horrible thought. Jenny remembered all the pretty things that her father gave her, then imagined them gone. She saw herself wearing dresses with tears in them and walking around barefoot because she'd lost her shoes in the woods. The visions were so sad, her eyes filled with tears. The girl was smiling now. One of her front teeth was dark with decay, and the other overlapped it, as if to hide it from view. I won't let them do this to you, she said. I'll tell you, my Jenny, what you must do. And she said words that sounded like an incantation. in a funny, trilling voice that buzzed over Jenny's ear. "Take a needle," she said, "take a stone, and prick their heels thrice. Bloody the stone and bury it low, and let the night women come. You'll bury it beneath their window," she said, "to invite the night women in." The buzz of the girl's chant was caught in Jenny's ear. It rattled there like a dying fly. "Who are the night women?" she asked. "Oh, they're beautiful," said the girl, "just like you. And they always give you exactly what you desire. And now," she continued, "go along home. Your parents will punish you terribly when you return, I'm sure, and it will be worse if you wait." She pointed Jenny toward a path the girl hadn't noticed before, promising it would lead her back to town. Jenny left her sitting by the fire in her old brown dress, smiling her brown and white smile. The walk back was quicker than she thought it would be, and she'd just been outside town all along. The first thing she saw when she broke through the trees was her mother, wringing her hands, and her father holding a lantern. When they saw her, they fell on her with embraces and tears of relief. At once, Jenny forgot the girl in the woods, with her crooked teeth and her strange commands. Frightened at having lost her, her parents were obedient again. Jenny asked and Jenny received. Her father took her back to the glassblower and bought her a whole bouquet of translucent red roses. Her mother bought her a pair of satin boots with 15 buttons apiece to replace the ones she'd lost. This went on for a little while, but soon her parents forgot the fear of almost losing Jenny. A little while after she returned from the woods, Jenny asked for a beautiful doll with blue glass eyes, the exact same shade as her own. Her mother reminded her she had too many toys already. When her father's friends came over to drink beer and laugh at jokes Jenny didn't understand, she was made to stay in her room instead of paraded out in a new dress, her hair combed to shining. The next morning, her mother refused to let Jenny take the last of the fresh cream to dump in her bathwater, slapping her hand when she reached for the jug. Her fingers stinging and her eyes damp with rage, Jenny remembered the little girl in the woods. She forgot the brown tooth and the old voice and the hard, curious mischief in her eyes. She remembered instead the warmth of the fire, the girl calling her beautiful. She heard the words the girl had said, remembering them now as curious and funny. So, Jenny took a needle. Jenny took a stone. Jenny waited until her parents were asleep and let herself into their room. Their faces were in darkness, but moonlight poured over their legs. It was easy to pull up the coverlet to reveal their feet and to prick the hardest parts of their heels where they wouldn't feel it. As she smeared their blood over the flat gray stone she'd found in the garden, the very last hidden bit of her that wasn't rotten yet gave a shudder. Who are the night women, she wondered, and who was that little girl in the trees? She smothered the thought, carrying the bloodied stone out into the night. As she dug up the earth outside her parents' window, burying the stone beneath it, the last bit of goodness at her center blackened and curled. She was rotten, clean through. Jenny lay awake in the dark of her bedroom, wondering what would happen when the night women came. She listened to the wind rattling the windows, the tap of branches on the glass. Slowly, slowly, the rattle became voices, distant and low and rich as wine. The tapping became the steady drumming of fingernails. Scratch, scratch. She sat up in bed. The shatter thump of glass breaking. She pulled the covers to her face, hiding all but her beautiful blue eyes. The rattling voices were closer now. They were musical and sweet. Someone laughed, then a moan, quick and cut off in the middle. Her mother's? She strained to hear the sounds, listening, not daring to breathe, and then the voices receded, became rattling again. The fingernails were branches, nothing more. She settled back in bed, almost relieved, almost disappointed. But something waited for her in the anteroom between awake and dreaming. Something was rummaging around in her mind. Someone's narrow, tickling fingers sifted through her thoughts, turning them over to see their ugly white bellies. Go to sleep, she told herself, already half dreaming. Perhaps the thing with fingers couldn't follow her into the deep. But it could. And it did. By the time the sun rose, Jenny, sleeping Jenny, had no more secrets. She woke feeling slow and cold and hollow. Before the sun was fully up, Jenny's mother opened her daughter's bedroom door. She was smiling. Her hair was braided back, and she wore the lovely green dress she saved for weddings. In her hands was a breakfast tray covered with good-smelling things, and she laid it across Jenny's lap. For you, my love, she said, kissing her daughter's forehead. Jenny's father, behind her, smiled. Only the nicest things for my beautiful girl. There was a thin line of sweat above his lip. His foot would not stop tapping. Jenny ate the breakfast. It was everything she liked, all of it hot and sweet and delicious. It was so good she could almost ignore the feeling of unease in her stomach. It wasn't until the final bite that she understood what felt so wrong. It was her mother. Usually she smelled of butter and vanilla and the wildflowers she put in her bath. And the something below all that was just her. It was the first and truest scent Jenny knew. But when she leaned in to kiss Jenny, she hadn't smelled any of those things. She hadn't smelled like anything at all. Jenny's father bought her a horse. She'd always wanted one, but he had said that she was too young. She'd have to wait until she was 15. Now she was 12 years old and had a beautiful piebald mare with a soft brown mane and a saddle of glistening leather. We love you, Jenny, so much. He held the reins in his fist, smiling proudly down at her. The horse shied away from her father's touch, as if his fingers were fleas. Jenny loved her horse. Her mother and father watched as she learned to ride, their faces lit with pride. Her father hadn't been out among his farmhands for days. He preferred to sit beside her mother and watch Jenny ride, watch Jenny eat, watch Jenny play with the new toys he carried home for her, beautiful things of glass and metal and wood wrapped in rustling blue paper. But Jenny's horse was her favorite gift of all. The animal was gentle and patient and loving. It might have healed the rot at her core in time. But a week after he led it home for her, her father moved toward the horse to tighten its saddle. The animal jerked away from his touch. As he reached for it again, insistent, the animal reared up, throwing Jenny into the dirt, and ran toward the fields. The sound of her mother's scream was not right. Even though the pain of landing hard on her back, the air knocked out of her, and her eyes filled with tears, Jenny was chilled by the sound of that scream. Her mother ran to Jenny, but her father ran past her after the horse. When he returned, he was favoring one shoulder, and his shirt was slick with blood. That animal will not hurt you again, he said, and darted his head down to kiss Jenny. Jenny screamed, and her parents paced outside her door. Finally, the sound of her mother's crying became too much to bear. Jenny, Jenny, she wept when her daughter finally opened the door. What can we do for you? What can we give to you? Please tell us. What will make you happy? Her parents' faces, side by side, were paler than they'd been. Her father looked narrow in his shirt, and her mother's mouth stood out redly against her skin. Looking at them gave Jenny the stuffed, sick feeling of having eaten too much sugared cream. "Leave me alone," she said unsteadily. "I will be happy if you leave me alone." Her mother's face twisted, but she nodded and went away. She came back, deep in the night. She sat by Jenny's bedside and stroked her daughter's hair. Silently, her fingers worried all the knots from it. Her scentless breath touched Jenny's cheek, while Jenny tried to make herself silent and small. She lifted one eyelid just enough to peek. Her mother was smiling again, always smiling. It was a smile so wide and radiant, her face could hardly hold it. She looked like someone had grabbed the sides of her mouth and tugged. Jenny squeezed her eyes shut and went back to sleep. Always at night now she heard the whispering, the fingernails on glass, and the sweet, low laughter. One day she saw her mother pulling a boot over her bare foot and gasped. The foot looked like a dead thing, purple and black with bruises and crusted with blood. She eased her boot on, wincing, then turned and saw her daughter. The wince dropped from her face, replaced by a bright smile. "My love," she said, holding out a hand. Jenny turned her face, hurrying away. When she came too close, her mother stroked her cheek. She kissed her forehead, held her hands, buried her nose in her hair. Jenny twitched and shuddered and twisted away, but her mother's smile never wavered. As her husband grew thinner, Jenny's mother thickened. Her body sweetened. It smelled like a tick. It swelled like a tick. Perhaps a baby was dreaming inside it, in the place where Jenny was once rooted. Her mother seemed to think so. She rubbed her stomach, her nails long and curling. "I am growing you the loveliest gift," she said. "You'll be so pleased when I give it to you. Kiss my cheek and I will give you chocolate. I will give you toys and I will give you all the pretty things that girls deserve." Her belly was round as an apple now, and where was Jenny's father? She hadn't seen him in days. If he'd gone to town, he'd be back now with an armful of dolls. His fields were empty, and his chair, and his side of her mother's bed. If he wasn't there, who was it her mother whispered with when Jenny heard whispering in the night? The same ones, perhaps, whose fingernails tapped on the glass. "Jenny, Jenny, were you always so foolish?" Not anymore, she decided. Never again. That night, she let her mother kiss her cheeks and her eyelids and her chin, enduring the awful blank of her touch. She ate the sugary foods that were fed to her, that melted on her tongue like sweet air. She let the woman comb all the tangles from her hair. Then she closed her bedroom door gently. By moonlight, she packed 3 dresses, 5 handkerchiefs, and the 4 gold coins hidden under her bed. All her dolls and stuffed kittens and glass roses she left behind. She thought she'd sneak out by the window, but the rustling had already begun, the tap-tapping on the glass. Her mother's bedroom was just beside her own, and something was already there at her window. Jenny opened her bedroom door quiet. She crept through the dark house, its empty rooms smelling of baked things and dust. Her mother waited for her by the door. Moonlight threw the swollen shadow of her belly across the floor. Her fingers stroked and stroked it. "Are you going away, my Jenny? Were you going to leave me? If I'd lost you, I'd never have been happy again." Her voice was woeful, but her smile was bright, and her tongue, had it always been so long and so wet and so red? "But I didn't lose you," she went on, "and I never will. You are my daughter, beautiful as the sun and more deserving. I want you close, my Jenny, as close as you can come." "I don't want to," Jenny whispered. The woman's fingers on her belly tapped and tapped. "My Jenny always wants. Come closer so I can whisper of all the things she'll get. Jenny felt her feet root to the floor, felt her body become pliant and soft. She felt herself changing, becoming, altering in a way she couldn't see. The mother inched forward on long, bare feet, black with bruises. She rubbed her belly and the thing that lay inside it, ready to become something too. She smiled at the girl and licked her lips. Her smile was wide, then wider, a grin, then a gash, then an unpeeling. Jenny was sweeter than you'd think. It's always that way with rotten things. When the mother was done, she laid down for the last time in her life. Her body made an awful sound as it fell away from the thing her stomach carried, like a peel from a fruit. The thing she'd birthed stretched. It untucked. It was shaped like a shadow that warped and ran and bent in odd places. With a shudder and a sigh, it gathered itself into the narrow form of a woman. Beautiful, with fingernails made to scratch at windows. Jenny's blood on the floor was red as candy, and the mother's gathered in black pools reflecting moonlight, like the glass eyes of a doll. The night woman was wet with it as she let herself out into the open air to greet her sisters. And that's the end of The Night Women. Spooky.